All right, great. So here's kind of our plan for today. I'm going to tell you a little bit about the ASHRAE Foundation, since this is probably going to be seen, or maybe some of you aren't quite familiar and jumped into this space. So I'm going to tell you who I am and why we're here. Talk about how our project came about, who we're working with. Then we're going to go through the process of like what the documents that we are processing or supporting folks for at clinic or project spaces, what those are, some of the nitty-gritty details of that. And then we'll close out with some next steps, some important dates, some opportunities to get involved, including the volunteer sign up. So we are not going to go into a lot of the like clinic logistics or the day of logistics. So that will happen at an orientation before signing up when you sign up for a clinic. But we'll get into that. So today is supposed to be like big picture. Here's the program. Here are the documents and why this whole program is necessary, and then be able to plug you into volunteering in future. Okay, so the ASHRAE Foundation, we are a brand new organization, a new nonprofit founded out of Central Reform Congregation. We were founded by Rabbi Susan Talvey with the idea to be sort of the engine for the justice work that so many of us know and identify Central Reform for in St. Louis, right? To make sure that that work has a home and a constant push behind it. ASHRAE is a Hebrew word, comes from it's actually the first word in the book of Psalms, as I understand it. And Rabbi Susan has taught me that some people translate ASHRAE to mean happy, but a deeper translation can look at it as sort of a process moving forward towards what might be considered happiness or wholeness. So I think that's sort of how our organization is grounded, is that we know this is a forward movement. It shouldn't be stagnant, right? In pursuit of justice and dignity for all. So we kind of work in three big buckets: empowerment, activation, and interruption. And it looks like a lot of different things, but this year it's a lot of startup. So, oops, got one more person hopping in. So realistically, our big project currently is this photo ID project. So we have a couple other initiatives happening, and we'll have some opportunities later this year that you can kind of get to know us more. But for now, this is how you get to know us. So I want to speak very briefly about House Bill 1878, and I imagine that many of you are experts in this space as well. So this is also a placeholder for a recording, right? Thinking about people who might want to jump in and watch this after the fact. So as you might know, this is a little bit repetitive, and if you have other things you want to add, jump in. But this bill was passed, signed into law earlier this year, and became effective on August 28th of this year. Sorry, let me adjust my screen. There we go. And basically, I think this piece of legislation is part of a broad context to restrict access to democracy and to silence certain people from participating fully in democracy. We could spend a really long time, and I am certainly among experts, right, that could talk about the whittling away of voter protections across the country. And this is sort of part of that theme. I think a lot of us also recognize that it's based on a lot of fake narratives, right? Missouri doesn't have a huge history of people, or actually Missouri and many other states, arguably all of them, don't have huge histories of people abusing elections to shift and shape democracy, right? But this fear that that is happening is what contributes to actions by Missouri legislature and other state legislatures to take this sort of restrictive and really suppressive measure. So there are a lot of problems with 1878, a lot of really negative impacts. I think sort of the top three that we hear a lot, discussed a lot, are impacts on voter registration, on absentee voting, and photo IDs. So clearly today we're going to spend most of our time talking about photo ID, but I think it's worth mentioning that there are significant impacts and limitations, as I think some of you, especially the league folks, right, and others know about how hard it is to solicit to help people register to vote, and now what you have to do, how it's defined, how it's not defined, blah, blah, blah. There's a link here, and I'll make sure that you all have access to it, to a one-pager from the Missouri Voter Protection Coalition that explains in much more detail. I don't want to use too much of our time, but I want to ground us here because the changes that 1878 has led to in terms of necessity for having a photo ID in order to vote in Missouri has, I think, definitely increased the urgency for some people to get an ID. And we also know that getting an ID for a lot of people provides access to a multitude of services and tools to meet basic necessities, basic needs that are not voting, right? So this is a both and in terms of, yes, this is about voting. Clearly 1878 is about voting. Our project is about voting, but it's also about increasing access to everything else that comes with the photo ID. Photo ID, what changed with 1878? Basically, Missouri has been a photo ID to vote, a voter ID, excuse me, state for, I want to say 2017, correct me if you know better than I do. It's been a process building, increasing the kinds of identification that we have to show in order to vote. What 1878 did is it eliminated many of the previously acceptable forms of IDs that are required to vote, and has said that you must have a non-expired Missouri issued or federally issued photo ID, right? And so a student ID is no longer good. The Secretary of State card that they mail you, that I have voted with almost exclusively because it always has the poll information, right? It's all right there, gone, right? Like those are not enough in order to vote. Now, the Secretary of State will jump on me for saying those things because they say that if you're registered, everyone can vote. And what that means is if you show up to the polls and don't have proper identification, you can fill out a provisional ballot, cast a provisional ballot, and if your signature is found to match that's on the registry, or you show up later that day on election day with a photo ID, then your vote will be, your ballot will be counted, right? So we also know that laws like this disproportionately impact certain members of our community. We know that people who are already excluded in a lot of ways from American society and democracy will be further excluded by this, right? So people with disabilities, people who are homebound, people who, I mean, the list is going on and on. And of course, now I click something and I can't actually see my notes. Let me go back one here. So I think where that also impacts our very young voters, right? People who, for example, are students and can vote in elections here, but if they don't have a Missouri driver's license, now they no longer can. And then for a lot of students, that means, right, like in order to get a Missouri license, you have to relinquish your license in state of origin, which means if you're still on your parents' health care, then we're in all kinds of other problems, right? If you're just covered under that, but then you're living not with your parents and not in your permanent house, but you have to change that. You know what I'm saying? So it impacts, I think, a full spectrum of folks in very different ways. I also wanted to share, again, these are going to be, when I share the slides, you'll have access to this Missouri Voter Protection Coalition and the Election Protection Group in Missouri have been publishing all kinds of resources and literature to make people aware of what's happening. One of the things that really grinds my gears is that not only did this law pass, it meant that the Secretary of State was under no obligation to inform voters or anyone else in the public that this changed, right? So you didn't all get a big mailing from the Secretary of State that's like, oh, hey, the law changed and here's what you're gonna need and here's how you can do it and blah, blah. We didn't get that and we're not gonna get it. So other organizations are doing that, including impacts on absentee voting. There, again, we can go into this maybe at the end if we wanna talk about it, but I'm certainly not the most expert in the region and perhaps not even on this call. So there have been a multitude of responses to this, including the lawsuits that have been filed, and yay, League of Women Voters, who's involved in that too. Both of those are, I was just on a call with Denise yesterday. Was anyone else on the voter protection call yesterday? Do you want to share what you recall from the updates about the hearing last week?
I think she said there's a possibility they might even hear something this week or next. And they sounded, I would say, positive overall about how the judge treated them in the hearing. But of course, you know, they always have a poker face, don't they? You can't really tell what they're going to do. But they sounded, I would say, cautiously optimistic. Would you agree, Sarah?
I think so. There was a recent hearing, basically because the plaintiffs are asking for a temporary injunction, right? So they're asking the law that has gone into effect to be withheld from going into effect until the whole case can be heard and it can be determined whether or not this law is unconstitutional and not impede people from voting in November. So we will find out, hopefully, as you said, hopefully next week or within the next 2 weeks, whether or not it will go into effect or not, or remain in effect or not, I guess is the more appropriate way to say that. But for now, it is in full effect. I voted in the St. Louis City special elections a couple weeks ago, and you know, was part of a handful of folks that had to go into a provisional ballot line. I was resolved separately because my name changed, and despite having updated it online, it didn't reflect in the system and blah, blah. So like there was a line of people who were like, what? I need a photo ID, that had to then stand in the provisional line and cast a ballot because they either didn't have one or didn't bring it with them, or, you know, lots of confusion there. So while we are challenging the constitutionality and the like legal side of things, there's also the side of things that's like, okay, now we know that there's further restrictions. How do we help increase access within those restrictions to the best of our ability so that as many people as possible can navigate this new series of challenges? This is sort of the context that the North City Photo ID project emerges from and out of. I think you've all heard me say, if not, I'm going to say it again. I didn't make this up. I didn't develop this. We have worked really closely with St. Francis Xavier College Church on the campus of St. Louis University, who have been running an birth certificate and ID access program since 1993. So they've been at this for a hot minute, and they have a ton of systems in place that have continued to develop they are eagerly sharing it with us and with others. So we're going to come into that. But basically, as ASHRAE was new, I was in all these meeting spaces. I was at a meeting at the Tabernacle Hub in North City. It's in the old Farragut Branch Elementary School. It was purchased by the Tabernacle Church Community Development Corporation, rehabbed like $1.5 million. It's a beautiful space now, into a community center where they're bringing other organizations into North City. It's in the Jeff Vanderloo neighborhood. So they've got now Mercy Clinic in there. They have Pathways to Progress is in there. They're bringing a bank in there. They have reading and literacy classes and all sorts of stuff that they are bringing into the neighborhood. But they had tried a year ago to do an offsite clinic from College Church up there, and it didn't really work. They served about 5 people, and so it was like good. But in the debrief, I think there was a lot of questions about whether or not a one-off model even makes sense. Do people know that it's going to be there or how to be there and those sorts of things? This year, they were saying, the folks at the Tabernacle Hub were saying, we know that our people need this service up here, but we don't have capacity to build a whole program and run it here, but we do have relationship in the community. And College Church is saying, well, we have the whole opportunity to run the things, but we don't have capacity to run it up there. Insert ASHRAE Foundation, who says, well, I can connect those dots and we can inject some capacity to take a model that already exists, amplify it in a city, in a new part of the city where there are already relationships, and make that happen. So that's really what we have been doing. And that all happened just before 1878. And so now we got to be the guinea pig for how to teach other groups across the state how to do this, which I'll talk about at the end. So The goals here are to provide logistical and financial assistance for Missouri birth certificates, out-of-state birth certificates, and Missouri non-driver, non-real photo ID. I'm going to break all that up. We also hope to help folks confirm or correct their voter registration status when they're there. So we've had volunteers from the league both times we had a clinic so far, and they did voter registration. And I know one of our other volunteers before August 28th was able to sit with someone at a computer and help him update his own registration status after the volunteers had left, right? I think currently we're also able to give out, provide complimentary bus fares, which has been a huge, we've got a lot of positive feedback from that folks finally get there. And after they leave the clinic, they have to go get their documents processed, right? Both birth certificates and photo IDs are government issued documents, and I don't work for the government, so I can't issue them. But what we're trying to do is make sure that people have what they need in order to make that time most efficient at government offices. We'll pay for the cost of the documents, and we'll give you bus fares to help you get there. So I think I just should have clicked to this slide, but I didn't. So I already said most of this, but I think the other piece that I would emphasize here is about how we engage with the people that we encounter in this project. How many of you have had a less than magical experience at the DMV? And I'm just gonna maybe go out on a limb and say that I'm not the only person that identifies as white in this room, and the privilege that comes with both my whiteness, my highly educatedness, et cetera, has not insulated me from having unpleasant experiences in the DMV office, which means I can imagine folks who don't even have that insulation, right? How those experiences are. I've also encountered that when you get up to after you wait in line, and then you finally get to the counter, that oftentimes it has been hard for me to walk away with a clear understanding of what I was missing in order to get the things I came for, and that there's like an education process there. So we can talk about like attitude and behavior and all those sorts of things. There's also information and knowledge that isn't often shared in those spaces. And so how do we change that in the way we function as a volunteer program? And how do we start by saying, I'm just a neighbor that wants to help you as a neighbor have the same access that I do. And it might not be the best access, right? We're still complaining about the ways that we are being excluded, but I want you to get in while we still can. And how do we start to change the way that we talk to folks in these spaces? Not like to talk to folks without judgment of, why did you not understand this? What do you mean you don't have your birth certificate? Judge. How do we get rid of that in these spaces and start to build some common ground of like just being good neighbors and honoring the dignity of each other in this space? So I think that is really important also for me, is that folks who encounter us they should walk away feeling like, man, that there was something different about that space, right? Something felt good about that space, and that will make this project feel successful to me. Questions till now? We're going to go through the document process. We good? All right, so let's start with Missouri birth certificates, and I'll break like in each chunk. So if you need to interrupt me, let me know, but it's dense. So I'm going to get through a chunk and then we'll process together. So in Missouri, we basically start with this somewhat simplified flow chart. If you don't follow flow charts, then you can just close your eyes for a minute because this won't be helpful to you. I'm a visual learner, so a flow chart is extremely helpful to me. Basically, in order to get a birth certificate in Missouri, you can apply for it anywhere. So if you were born anywhere in Missouri, any vital records office can give it to you. You can apply in person, by mail, or online. And that's generally the three options for most birth certificates, including Missouri. There are some different, go ahead.
Do you have a flow chart we're supposed to be looking at?
Yes.
Or is there a slide that's supposed to be up?
I see it.
Oh, I'm not seeing it. Do I need to change my screen?
Hold on, I stopped sharing. Let me try that again. Maybe I clicked away. How about now?
Now I see.
I see it.
Okay,
Just the flow chart. That's okay?
yeah,
Okay. So it depends. So I was trying to say you can apply for it anywhere, but some of the offices have different procedures. So like if you're in St. Louis City or St. Louis County, the check gets made payable to someone different. The form looks a little different, but all the main parts of who's eligible to apply, what you need in order to apply, and how much it costs remain constant, right? That is relatively the same when we get to out-of-state birth certificates, where it's like usually a statewide process. However, some states have county-specific processes where you have to go to the county that you were born in order to apply for a birth certificate there. In Missouri, it's all connected, but in other states, it is not the same. If you have a photo ID, you can walk into the Vital Records office in the City Hall in the city of St. Louis, or the one in North County, and get your own birth certificate. All you need is a photo ID. If you don't have a photo ID, then you need 2 documents with your name on it, right? That could be something like a utility bill, a W-2. So this is where things get a little office specific. So us in College Church have built a really, let me come back to you, Elliot, have built a really good relationship with the City Hall DMV, the City Hall Vital Records office, excuse me, and the one on in North Hanley in Berkeley. And there's a little bit of flexibility in terms of if they are more understanding. If someone who doesn't have an ID, who needs a birth certificate in order to get the ID, but you need an ID to get the birth certificate, those offices recognize that dilemma and are willing to accept things that, for example, the DMV will not accept for these purposes. But if you have a letter, like I think there was someone who got a letter from their child's school, right, sent home, that was their address, their name, and on school letterhead, and that worked for the St. Louis City Vital Records office. So you need 2 documents. One other thing we've been able to come up with, for example, many men who are over 18 were automatically registered for selective service. And you can pull up that selective service registration form online with like name and social. I think you kind of type it in, and then you print a form that's like, yep, you were registered for selective service and it's official. And that can work as a document that shows your identity to the Vital Records office. If you can't get anything, then sometimes an organization like ASHRAE or a congregation that you're a part of, or if you go to a food bank regularly, sometimes you can request from those organizations, can you write a letter that says, yes, I know so-and-so, and they come in with such and such frequency, signed letterhead, that will count in order to get a birth certificate. There's also a certificate of homeless status or youth status, and we're going to come back to that. But basically, you either need a photo ID or you need these 2 other documents with your name on it, and you need $15 in order to get your birth certificate. At City Hall and at North County, you walk in, you show the things, and you walk out with a certified copy of your birth certificate in hand. At City Hall, that's really convenient for folks who need both because they walk from one corner to the other. So, Elliot, I know you have a question. I want to pause for a minute and answer your question.
So any type of photo ID, it could be a student ID, anything, doesn't have to be state issue.
I would say in those 2 offices, North County and St. Louis City, they will accept any kind of photo ID that looks like a real photo ID. So like a, something more, they've taken things, student IDs, sometimes the folks who are recently released from incarceration have like a parole ID card, or their, forgive me, I don't know the name of the card that is an ID card when you are incarcerated. Some people have that with them and can use that to get a birth certificate. I would say when we are looking outside of St. Louis, it is worth a call or a visit to a local vital records office to ask those questions and say, you know, in these situations, in these cases, you know, would you accept, would you accept this kind or that kind of document? The other thing here, let me talk briefly about who can apply for a birth certificate, because fortunately, I cannot walk in and get a copy of Susan's birth certificate. It's not my right to do that. I can do it for me, and I can do it for my son and my immediate family members. Immediate family members refers to parents, siblings, and grandparents. It does not include aunts or uncles or cousins. So the family member must be in the direct line of descendancy of the registrant in order for them to apply for their birth certificate. Direct family members must identify at least one parent that is listed on the birth certificate. So if it's your brother, but they don't know your mother's name and your father's not listed, then it gets complicated, right? You can also obtain a birth certificate for someone else if you're an official representative, like attorneys or doctors, and they need to then demonstrate their link in that professional capacity. So they do that differently. Or if you're an other authorized agent, if you are, you know, if you have a legal authorization from someone to apply for their birth certificate, for the birth certificate on their behalf. Why would that be helpful? Is, for example, if I have someone who is unhoused, who has no documents, who can't find two, or is living in a county where they won't accept the kinds of things we could come up with here, they can write a letter that says, I authorize so-and-so, date of birth such and such, authorize Sara Ruiz to get apply for my birth certificate for me. They sign it, and then I provide the information for me as the applicant and their information as the registrant, but I don't have to, it takes away the documentation requirement for the applicant, for the registrant. Either parent that is listed on the birth certificate can apply for the child's birth certificate, but if the father is not listed on the birth certificate, he is not entitled to a copy of his child's birth certificate unless he can demonstrate that he has custody or paternity authorization. So if he's not listed, dad is not automatically eligible to get the birth certificate. We haven't, I mean, we could go into a lot more detail, but we haven't seen these sorts of, you know, such and such 5 degrees of separation coming in these spaces. College Church has done a lot of advocacy in order to get a new form from the state of Missouri that's the affidavit of homeless or unaccompanied youth status. That's a lie. I'm confusing the two forms. Let me back that up. They have done a lot of that advocacy, but that is for the DMV form. This is the Department of Health and Human Services form. It's all really clear. If you identify as homeless or unaccompanied youth, you can get 1 free certified copy of your birth certificate in your lifetime. Technically, it's tracked by Jefferson City, so that if you get a free one once, any vital records office should pop up that you are no longer eligible for a free one. There's a separate form. It's a PDF form that you fill out. The definition for homeless status is that a person lacks fixed, regular, and adequate nighttime residence. So that doesn't necessarily mean that you're living in the streets. It doesn't necessarily mean that you're in a shelter. You could be couch hopping from family members and friends, and that would, some would argue, I would argue, that meets the burden of this definition. The statutory language of the definition is on the form, and basically the person who fills it out, the individual who is saying, I am this, says, I read this and I believe I meet that definition, and that's it, right? There's not a further burden of proof to demonstrate that you meet the definition of being homeless or unaccompanied youth. That you still need the other document, the other kinds of documents to get your ID, to get your birth certificate, but this will waive the fee for it. Correct. I'm going to kind of skip this. This is a helpful link in the future, but we haven't processed a lot of corrections or amendments to birth certificates. That usually is not something that our clinic could help with. It's a little bit more complicated. Usually means you have to get a court order one way or another to change what was on your birth certificate. But there is some information here about how to do that so that, for example, I have some of those like printed out so that if someone comes in with that challenge, then we have some information that we can explain and equip, hopefully, with like what to do next. Similarly with legal name changes, gender marker changes, those are again sort of beyond the scope of what we can immediately like help with at the clinic, but we are able to give some information to folks and point people in the right direction for what they would need to do in order to change their name or gender on their birth certificate in Missouri. Okay, pause there on Missouri birth certificates. Questions, concerns? Let's keep pushing. Out-of-state birth certificates basically follow the same thing. There are two main options really for obtaining an out-of-state birth certificate. Clearly you could go in person, but most people that we see are not going to be doing that. You can either apply online or by mail. The basic process is that you have to find the state that the individual was born in, and then you get the application, and you fill out the things that they need on the application. We print the check for it, we mail it in, and it's good. A lot of the states have very different requirements. So let me pause really quickly and pull up the index, because College Church created, and then we continue to modify this out-of-state birth certificate index. You can also see this on my screen, yes? Okay, great. So basically, this is a good starting point. So you pick the state, and then there's a summary. Oh, that didn't really work. There we go. So then there's a summary of the same things that we just discussed for Missouri, but paralleled per the requirements of each state. As you can imagine, they're all different. A lot of them are similar, but I will not purport to tell you like an out-of-state birth certificate always needs X, Y, and Z because they're different. So you have to start. Oh, geez. Sorry, I just kicked my dog by accident. Okay, what are you doing? Go. So then you have to figure out what they need, what's required, and walk through those process with them. Hold on just one second. She thought she wanted to be in here, but she did not. Okay. So the other thing you can do, some of the forms for out-of-state birth certificates require the form to be notarized. Some of them don't. So there's not really a rule of thumb on that one. It's maybe they need to be notarized, maybe they don't. Some of them require you to mail in additional documents, like a copy of your photo ID or a copy of your social security card. So you have to navigate all of those nuances for the particular state that someone is applying for. Okay, give me just 1 second. We're going to pop back in here. Okay. When you mail in the applications, we kind of talked about that. Generally speaking, you have to mail in a self-addressed stamped return envelope when you mail that in. Not always. If folks come to the clinic to fill out an out-of-state birth certificate application, I'm the one that's responsible for mailing after the clinic. So we compile everything, and then the form that they're given at the clinic says within 24 hours, ASHRAE will mail it, blah, blah, blah. It takes 6 to 8 weeks. We've had some folks get it much sooner than that, maybe 3 to 4 weeks. In some states, you'll be lucky if you get it in 8 weeks. I think New York has a notoriously terrible wait time for processing. The other thing that we've learned is that most states won't call you if you did something wrong on the application. They just won't process it. They won't return it. They won't call you or send you a letter that's like, oh, we got your application, but you forgot to do this or that or the other, or this doesn't match. They just don't process it. And so if you don't receive it, maybe within 6 weeks, I would be suggesting the individual call and be asking, like, did you receive my application? What's the status? Like, what am I missing? And go from there. The other thing to keep in mind is that on most mail-in applications for birth certificate, the mailing address listed on the application might need to match the address on the identification document. So if an individual submits a utility bill or a photo ID, let's say, and they need to, maybe they have an expired Missouri ID and they can submit that for a California birth certificate. If that address doesn't match the mailing address where they want their birth certificate mailed, sometimes that's not allowed. So then it gets challenging to figure out, well, if I'm moving in a month, should I even apply now or not? Will I have access to mail here or not, right? And you have to kind of think through those logistics. I think I mentioned most of this. All of the applications require a signature on the application form. Not all of them require it to be notarized. Sometimes you have to send supporting documents, sometimes not. And I would say when in doubt, like, we just call. Sitting in the clinics, especially because we're doing clinics on Wednesdays and office hours on Thursdays, most of these vital records offices are open since we're there during working hours. Harder to do that on an all-day Saturday clinic, but weekday clinics, we can just call and say, here's the situation, here's what we want to do, does that work, what else do I need, and ask those questions. Generally, it's easier to get in touch with someone at Vital Records or to get offices than it will be to get in touch with someone at a Department of Revenue in other states. Another thing that really grinds my gears is that if you have more money, it's easier to get a birth certificate. And I'm going to say it that way because that's been what I've seen so far. Almost all the states in the country allow you to apply for a birth certificate online through a third-party company, private company called Vital Check, check with a K, in case you're trying to look it up. Vital Check is advantageous because it frequently requires a lot less documentation because an individual who's filling it out online can answer those goofy identity verification questions like, here's 4 addresses, which one has ever been associated with you? Have you ever owned one of these 5 vehicles? The person that you went to high school with, was their name ever that, right? Like, I think you've probably all answered those questions at some point. Maybe a little creeps me out how the government does those kinds of questions, but they do them. And sometimes that means people that really don't have documents to get a birth certificate can, if they do it through Vital Check, not all, but it's usually about 3 times more expensive than paying in person. So there's usually the main fee, then there's a processing fee, then there's a shipping fee. So keep in mind, Missouri, for example, is a $15 birth certificate fee. I'm pretty sure there's a $12 processing fee and a $12 shipping fee. So it's not great, but sometimes if it's the only option, you can make it work, we'll make it work. College Church does not process, when they're doing clinics, they do not use Vital Check for cost purposes. They're seeing 60 people a week currently. So there's literally just not enough money to be able to pay for folks 3 times, right, the cost of mail-in applications. Sometimes Vital Check is quicker, like the application, the actual document will be mailed faster than if you submit the application for it by mail. Sometimes not. ASHRAE at this point, this is sort of like the third option, but if it's an option that we can make work for someone, I'll pay for it. When we're in a clinic space, we will go through that sort of step by step. So if you keep coming up and running up against obstacles, and then you get to the point where like, I think the only way that we can do this is through Vital Check, then you're going to talk to me about it. And I'm going to be like, let's do it. And then we'll process it that way. But again, because of the high cost, we want to make sure that we've exhausted the other two options before we move into this. Questions?
I have a question.
Yes.
I have two questions. Is there a notary in the clinic on the day?
So far, yes, we have volunteers that either are in a volunteer role and also happen to be notaries, or are there who are volunteering to be the notary on site. So we
Okay.
haven't been into a space. So where we will run into that, for example, is on Thursday office hours. I won't always have a notary there. However, there is a bank that is opening soon at the hub location, and usually a bank has a notary there. I'm also supposed to, it's on my list so that I can become a notary and always be there, but I haven't done that yet. So we will figure that out as we go. But on the walk-in clinic days, there's a notary present.
My second question is, what is the purpose of using Vital Check? Would that result in a birth certificate getting mailed to them?
Yes.
That is the outcome
Yep.
of
Yep.
that process. Okay.
Correct. Yep. It's basically you can get a birth certificate in person, by mail, or online. And Vital Check is the online option for that. Is usually, I think there's maybe like 2 states that don't participate in Vital Check, but it's pretty much all of them, but it's also the most expensive way to do it. Some states, Christine Dragonette at College Church was just looking into this, that some states have their own online application process. And so we're trying to like stay up on that and add them to the index. But it might be worth it sometimes if you're doing an out-of-state one and in a clinic setting and you have your, the laptop there, just Google the office or click the link and go see if they have their own online application portal that would be government run effectively, right? Might be contracted, but not Vital Check, but like through St. Louis City Vital Records office, apply online. That might be, it's not an option in St. Louis City, but it might be an option in other places. And so it might be worth checking if you're trying to exhaust all the options. Cool. Other questions? Okay, now we get to the juicy part, photo IDs. How do we start? Okay, let's start. Let's just walk through the flow chart. I think that's most easy. That's a lie. We're going to start here. There's basically, you need 5 things to get your Missouri state ID. When I'm talking about a Missouri state ID, I am referring to a non-driver photo identification card. Some people call it a non-driver license, even though it's not a license to drive because it's a non-driver, but some people call it a photo ID, photo state ID, state photo ID. There is not such a thing as a voter ID that is different than a Missouri non-driver, non-real photo identification card. So I don't like to say voter ID because I think that triggers in my brain that like there's another thing that's called a voter ID. You need a photo ID to vote, but that's not a voter ID. Like there's not a, it's confusing to me. So I try not to use that language. I think we actually used to call the voter registration cards like a voter ID, but that's another reason why I just don't use that language because it gets too confusing. So in order to get a photo ID from the state of Missouri, you have to prove identity, lawful status, Missouri residency, and Social Security, and then you have to pay for it or qualify for a free ID. We'll come back to that one. So when you're proving identity, the most common thing that you would use is a copy of your birth certificate, which you could also use to prove lawful status, that you were born in the United States. If you are not born in the United States, you can prove lawful status through a handful of other immigration documents like your permanent resident card or your naturalization paperwork. If you have employment authorization, that does not show lawful status. That's a whole nother conversation, but there is a whole list of these, right? So this is my summary to keep it simple, and we're going back to the flow chart. But there's three-page documents from the Department of Revenue, one for real IDs and one for non-real IDs. And there's like 30 documents that are qualifiable. Like, what could you show for Missouri residency? Here's 35 options. So this is what you're seeing on the screen is not the exhaustive list, just the like, generally, here's what we see. Missouri residency, to prove that you live in the state of Missouri, is generally done by a utility bill, maybe your voter registration card, if you have a bank statement, if you have a rental agreement or car insurance or a W-2, then you can use that. You could also use their certificate of homeless status. So we're going to come back to that one. Social Security, you either have, we're going to come back to this slide, but you either have to say it or show it depending on your particular circumstances. If you have to show it, you can show your Social Security card, or you can show a W-2 or a 1099 or a pay stub if it has your full name and full social printed on it. So my pay stubs, for example, have my whole social except the last 4 starred out, right? And so that won't count as proof of Social Security. Then you have to pay, the cost is $18. That being said, you can kind of see now my 2 like documents needed boxes on either side of this flow chart. Those are the same, except as it relates to the Social Security number. If you have had an ID that expired before 2009, or you never had one, then you have to show a physical document with your Social Security number on it. If you have had one since then, and it expired, then you can just recite your Social Security number. You just have to say it out loud. So if you have one that, if you lost one, but it's still valid, and you need to go in and get a replacement, then you just have to recite it, right? Because they have already, the DMV has already received the documents that they need, and they're still valid according to their rules, that they don't need to see proof of it again. So if you have never had one, you have to show a card. If you did have one, but it expired before 2009, you have to show a card. Otherwise, you can just recite it. Okay, so once you acquire all those documents, which is usually why people come in and say, oh, I need my photo ID. And we say, well, do you have your birth certificate? They're like, oh, I don't need my birth certificate. I need a photo ID. Now you see how they're linked together. Generally speaking, a birth certificate knocks out 2 of the 4 requirements for the photo ID. So then we like, okay, let's get the birth certificate first, and then we'll come back to the photo ID. If you have ever received, so Missouri has a program that they used to call the Show It to Vote program. Within the last 30 days, it has changed, and they are now calling it Go Vote Missouri or Go Vote Mo. And we are continuing to get different information about this. So I'm flagging that as a disclaimer. How it should work is that Missouri has this program, and they will pay for one once in a lifetime opportunity, one time, a free non-real, non-driver photo ID if you are eligible, which means if you're eligible to vote, which means you are older than 18, you have no felonies related to voting. You can have felonies, but they cannot be related to voting, and you're not currently on probation. So if you meet those requirements and you have never received a free ID to vote, then you should be able to go in the DMV and say, hey, here's all my documents. I need my free ID to vote, and they should give it to you. You can hear my overemphasis of the word should, because it doesn't happen like this all the time. We have had folks that go in that are prepared to do that, and the DMV employee is like, we don't do that here, or doesn't know what the program is, or doesn't know how to do it, or doesn't believe it, or says that they already had one, but isn't able to like prove any of that. So there have been some challenges to that. Most recently, last week, St. Francis sent someone, College Church sent someone there who was turned away because they had previously paid for a photo ID that had expired, and they were saying, oh, well, I want my free one. And the DMV person turned them away and said, well, you can't have a free one if you've already paid, which is new information. And so then St. Francis was making a bunch of phone calls and tracking down different people, the Secretary of State, to actually get like, what is the deal here? Like, is that a rule? Is that a restriction? Like, where's it? Someone needs to explain how this is supposed to work, which they're not quite forthcoming with at this time. So for now, at our clinic, I kind of use best judgment to figure out if the particular individual who is eligible for a free ID to vote feels confident to go into a DMV and self-advocate. If they are like, yes, I can do that, we have a sheet of paper that gives some more language and tries to look a little more official, so that they have something that they can give to a DMV person and be like, no, it's a program, I'm eligible for it, right? To help them self-advocate. We've also had some folks, I know specifically there were like 2 elderly women on different days that just were struggling, I think baseline, to get through all of the details and nuances and things like that. And when we got to the point of like, one of them was disabled, so then there was a whole other like challenge that like when you finally get to the DMV, the last thing I want to happen is you go through all of it and then they don't have $18 to pay for it because the DMV shuts down this whole free ID to vote thing. So we wrote her a check and said, just go get your damn ID, right? Like, I don't have time to mess with people being treated that way right now. So we're using it a little bit. That's a little ambiguous in our clinic space, but at this point, we are trying desperately to expand access, right? If not, it's $18. We'll write a check, and then they can go get it. Let me skip to a couple things and make sure this we just talked through. It's the same thing. These are the 2. There's links here. So like the non-real ID, we talked about this briefly. This is the full 2-page, I think it's 3 pages actually, list of documents, 2 pages, there we go. So you can see that to get, identity, like to prove identity, there's all of those boxes. To prove lawful status, you can have any one of those documents. Social Security, much shorter list, right? Proof of Missouri residency, much longer list. If you've had a name change, you also have to have a proof of your lawful name change. That's only happened with one person that we've seen, and she had her marriage license with her. So yeah, that's that. Let me tell you briefly about real and non-real. So, oh, sorry, before I do that, after when they go to the DMV, right, and I think we maybe all have had this experience recently, you're given a paper temporary ID, and then usually within 2 weeks, your physical card will be mailed to you. If not, they're encouraged to call the Department of Revenue at this number. I've been working with a woman who is in this particular situation and has not received her ID. And it has been not easy at all, impossible yet, no resolution, to get in touch with someone. And at this point, I'm like, I'm just gonna write a check and you have to go just apply again and like do the whole process over, because you can't even talk to someone to say like, I already did all of this, where's my ID? Real versus non-real. The real ID will be required for air travel and entering federal facilities. Currently not effective until May of next year. That date continues to move out. It's effectively the same list of documents, but you need additional, like instead of 1 proof of residency, you need 2 or 3 or something like that. And so it is a higher burden. to prove. And so most of the folks that we see won't have a reason to have a real ID, and certainly would find it more challenging to find all the documents you need in order to get it. What we have been saying is that if you get a non-real ID now, and you need a real ID in the future, with your now birth certificate and valid ID, is much easier for you to get a passport, in which case you can more readily have access to spaces that you would need a real ID for. I think we talked about this already. Again, this has not been consistent across offices. And so we have a form that we use at our clinics that we give to someone, but it requires self-advocacy, right? It requires you to stand at the DMV and say, no, no, I want my free ID to vote, and I know about this program, and I'm entitled to it, and here's why. And if they go along with it, like, great. If, like, ideally, right, the offices are going to be informed and they know about the program and they know how to do it. And sometimes they are not, and they don't, and then you have challenges in that way. Social Security card is not something that we are able to help folks with at the clinic. We have materials that we can give that explains like how to do it, or where to do it, and what is needed. But it's not something that we are processing, and there's no cost for it, so there's not a payment to get like your Social Security card. But you have to get to the Social Security office. So if I know if someone's at the clinic and they know they have to get it, and I'm giving them information about it, and I have extra bus passes, I'll give them some extra bus passes, because I would rather people have access to it, especially because I can't do it. I don't think we'll go through all those documents, but basically, you know, you need a couple of some specific. Sorry, here. I said we're not going to go through it, and I'll just say it really quickly. You have to, there's an application form, and then you need US citizenship or immigration status, or proof of birth in the United States, age, identity. So the identity, then there's like a whole list of things, like if you don't have a photo ID, how do you get your Social Security card? If you can't get the ID without the social, right? It's the same catch-22. They also have a whole list of things of like identity. You can take an employee ID card, a school ID card, health insurance, a life insurance policy. Yeah, those sorts of things. They're like, oh, you know, it has to be not expired. It has to show your name, identifying information, and preferably a recent photograph. So if you don't have those, then they'll accept other documents, which would include all of those that I just read. So it gets tricky, which is precisely why we don't offer more direct assistance with that. But we have those pamphlets. They're from the Social Security office that I just printed out. So we can give folks that and tell them where the offices are. Okay, so moving forward, we have done 2 clinics, one in August and one in September. We have seen 33 guests at those clinics and a couple other walk-ins, like appointments that I made. I have 7 individuals scheduled for appointments on Thursday. So, and I have 3 individuals scheduled for appointments next week already. So perhaps the appointment times are going to prove more effective than a clinic model. I'm not really sure yet. We're still trying to figure this out. Roughly half of our guests have been under 40 years old. Definitely a lot of young parents. Definitely during school enrollment, it was parents needing, we saw a lot of folks, parents that needed birth certificates for their kids. We've trained, not including you all, 63 volunteers. We've covered the cost of 45 Missouri birth certificates. So as you can imagine, we've seen 33 people. How have we covered all of these documents? Because a lot of times a mom comes in and says, I have 4 kids and I need their birth certificates, and we pay for all 4 of them, and we need hers, and she needs an ID, right? So it can be multiple documents per person. We've distributed 124 bus fares, and we've started to do work at the statewide level to equip more groups across the state of how to do this. Moving forward, as I mentioned, we're offering monthly clinics, which are no appointments, just walk in. Our next one is October 19th. It's a Wednesday from 10 to 2. And every Thursday starting this week, so Thursdays in October, November, and December, we will offer appointments from 10 to 2, so not walk in. You have to have an appointment. Both of those are happening at the hub. We have an office space there, so when we do the clinics, we kind of take over a whole area of the hub. But for appointments, we're going to be doing them in our office, and there's also like a meeting space outside of our office. It's on the second floor of the hub, so we can use other spaces if we need to accommodate folks that maybe wouldn't be able to go upstairs. But for now, we will be meeting upstairs. So here are just a couple important dates. So I mentioned sort of those last four bullet points we just talked about. So the walk-in clinics, there's one in November, one in December. There's also the voter registration deadline to vote in November is October 12th. So that is rapidly approaching. Absentee voting is currently underway in Missouri. So excuse-based absentee voting is good through November 7th. No excuse in-person absentee voting will start later this month and go till November 7th. Next steps. Okay, so you can definitely sign up to volunteer at Thursday hours and monthly clinics. So we're going to show that. I'm going to give you that link next. The other thing I mentioned briefly is this website that we have started to compile with St. Francis that we have been sort of hosting a group that is part of the Missouri ID Access Coalition. We have a subcommittee that's now called the Program Support. Now I just forgot it. Regional Program Support Subcommittee. We had about like 40 people on our first Zoom meeting of people statewide who were like, tell us how to do this. So this whole website is designed for that, but it has, that being said, has a lot of materials that might be helpful for you as volunteers, like quick start resources, our recorded Zoom training. So I'll probably add this volunteer training recording to this part so that folks can also see that. Training handouts are here. You'll be able to see all of our volunteer binders that we use at the ASHRAE clinic. So like this is effectively the content of the ASHRAE binders. And you can see that here too. So this kind of just is designed to help people start the clinics, but might also be a helpful resource for volunteers as well. And if you want to participate in that subcommittee, you can sign up on this website and join our Zooms and help maybe as a volunteer. Other clinics start up. Like I just learned that there's a group that's going to do one in Franklin County coming up soon. And so I have asked if they need us to push it to volunteers, like if they need more capacity or want someone who's maybe done this a couple of times to like go be with them, that we could send folks there. So we'll share everything here. The other thing that is on this website is a statewide clinic calendar, which we're really excited about. So this will start to show the ideas. This will get filled up with clinics happening across the state, and then folks can be able to see like what we're a part of at the statewide level. Okay, couple other things. We are starting some conversations about regional fundraising, which I think is really cool. That's something that I have experience doing from an immigration justice background. And I think that there's some really great opportunities for us to think about like pooled and collaborative funding so that the college church program, this program, and other programs that might emerge in the St. Louis region don't compete for funding, but that we have enough funds so that anyone who needs it can get an ID. And then thinking more broadly about how do we sustain or support programs that are developing across the state. So if that's something that interests you, I'd be happy to loop you into some more of those conversations. You can do voter registration now. Experts on the call can say it better than I can, but you have to follow the rules of the Secretary of State, which means do not get paid or compensated until we have a legal understanding of what that means exactly, and register as a solicitor online. You have to do that for every election cycle. So if you're doing it now, you will have to do it on November 9th as well to be ready for the next time. You can also sign up to be an election protection volunteer. So there's a link here, and I'll share this by email as well. And then, like I said, I generally am a person who finds it really frustrating to be this downstream in all of these forces that are coming at us, right? I like to be, when you're down here, you're always losing, right? When you're at this level of like meeting direct needs and trying to pull people out of chaos, there will never be enough of us, right? So I'm constantly wrestling with like, yes, we have to do this, and we have to change the reasons that are forcing us to scramble in this way. So how do we do that? Some of that is happening in the courts, and we're really hopeful for those lawsuits. We also know that MOLEG isn't done. We're going to see more horrible things come up in the next legislative session. I will be going really regularly to Jefferson City to talk about it, to listen to hearings, to offer testimony. If you haven't been, I will be having regular calls for folks to come join me, to go. We got 2 hours of a drive on the way there, so we can get you nice and ready and fired up. You don't even have to prepare in advance. And then we can cuss the whole way back. I mean, debrief the whole way back after we figure out how it went. So there'll be plenty of opportunities, not just through me, but certainly with plenty of other organizations who are going to keep fighting for this. Certainly, your homework is to vote if you are so eligible. If you are not, and even if you are, I would encourage you to find 5 other people that you can have a conversation with to say, hey, what's your plan for voting? Are you going to go? Do you need me to watch your kids? Do you want me to, you know, can I pick you up? We can go together. Can I buy you a coffee on the way? Blah, blah, blah. Do you want to get tacos? There was in Arizona, I went to grad school in Arizona, and there was a whole like student group that gave people tacos like as they were voting. It was the coolest thing. It was like weird and cool, but also like got people excited to go do a thing because there was some other space of it, of community and celebration and energy there. We are also co-sponsoring a Get Out the Vote phone banking event at Central Reform Congregation on October 20th. We're partnering with Progress Women and Promo, and I think there's like 6 other, I think Planned Parenthood is going to be a co-sponsor. So it is a 501c3 Get Out the Vote nonpartisan call. The event is definitely part of the Row Your Vote effort, which I know doesn't speak to everyone, but the call script itself is not related to that for 501c3 reasons. But it's a fun night. There's gonna be food, there's competition. We'll have lots of cool folks there. You can come as an individual. You can register a whole table. And if you've never done it before, this is a really fun way to do phone banking. We get lists of women. We're calling women voters in Missouri. So you get a list and you get a script, and you sit there and you make phone calls, and you're really saying like, hey, I'm going to go vote in November. Are you going to go vote too? You're not asking how they're going to vote. You're not even trying to tell them to vote pro Roe or whatever issue speaks to you. But there are a lot of issues that are going to dictate our future on the ballot this November, both in issues and in candidates. So we actually just need everyone to turn out and vote. So that's the point of this event. And there'll be some fun and competition and games and things like that as we go. So I will follow up by email to make sure you have all of these links. You should be able to find it all on our website. Here they are now also. So if you know how to do these, you can use your phone. If you're like, yes, I want to do this right now, put on your camera and hover it over one of those, and it will link you directly to that page on your phone. I will also just send you the links. So maybe this is not helpful, but if you're watching it on a recording, maybe this is helpful. If not, sorry. And that's all I have for today. That's my email, our website. The 252-8060 is a Google Voice number, so call or text works there.